All right. Good evening. I am Ken Clark, Director of the Tompkins County Office of Human Rights. And we want to thank those of you who have joined us for this program, which commemorates International Human Rights Day, which in fact is tomorrow. On December 10th, 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, also known as the UDHR, was adopted by the General Assembly of the United Nations. The United Nations had been founded only 3 years prior. In the same year, World War II ended by the 5 major geopolitical powers that won the war. The UN's mission was focused on peacekeeping to prevent the type of conflicts that led to 2 unprecedented global conflicts between 1914 and 1945. Central to that mission was the creation, for the first time in human history, of 30 articles or standards that outline the basic civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights that all human beings should enjoy and respect. The UDHR, coupled with the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and its 2 optional protocols, and the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, constitute what is called the International Bill of Human Rights. While this declaration was a significant global accomplishment, most of us acknowledge that such statements must be applicable at the local level where everyday people live. Put another way, Eleanor Roosevelt, the former First Lady who chaired the committee that wrote the UDHR, said this in 1958, on the 10th anniversary of the Declaration. Where, after all, do human rights begin? In small places, close to home. So close and so small that they cannot be seen on any maps of the world. Yet they are the world of the individual person, the neighborhood one lives in, the school or college one attends, the factory, farm, or office where one works. Such are the places where every man, woman, and child seeks equal justice, equal opportunity, equal dignity without discrimination. Unless these rights have meaning there, they have little meaning anywhere. Without concerted citizen action to uphold them close to home, we shall look in vain for progress in the larger world. Tonight, we are fortunate to have 3 human rights experts who can speak to the application of human rights in those small places close to home. Guided by the international theme of this year's Human Rights Day, equality, reducing inequalities, advancing human rights. They will talk about their work and highlight 3 of the most important human rights issues that they feel should be addressed. With us this evening are Constance L. Frazier, Rockland County Commissioner on Human Rights, Einaudi Esposito, Executive Director of the Orange County Human Rights Commission, and Maria Imperial, Acting Commissioner of the New York State Division of Human Rights. The New York State Division of Human Rights really serves as the human rights police and those who enforce the human rights for the state of New York, and was one of the first of its type of organizations in the country when founded in 1945. Our panelists, leaders in our collective field of human rights, reflect a culturally diverse group of women similar to the culturally diverse group of women which worked with Mrs. Roosevelt in the drafting of the UDHR and ensured that gender equality was highlighted and inclusive language was used in this document. Our guests will each speak in the order in which they were introduced, so we'll begin with Ms. Frazier.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Clark. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am profoundly grateful for the invitation extended to me by Dr. Ken Clark, the Executive Director of the Tompkins County Human Rights Commission, to briefly speak with you, commemorating the International Human Rights Day, a little bit about Rockland County and our commission. We consider ourselves very special. And I'm honored to be the commissioner of the Rockland County Human Rights Commission. Just a little bit about our mission. And I think it's very lucid, so it's not difficult, it's not rocket science. But our mission briefly is the Rockland County Human Rights Commission is to empower, that's a very powerful word, to empower all people in Rockland County with knowledge of their rights and to engage in actions that foster the protection of those rights. And that in itself is a mouthful, but a lot of people don't know what their rights are. And the responsibility of the commission is to point them out, and to people who violate them to make sure we put them in check. A little bit about the overview. How does the Rockland County Human Rights Commission operate? First of all, I've been in commissioner since I believe it was July 13th of 2017. Rockland County is very small. We're the smallest county in the state of New York. We're the most densely populated and the most diverse in the entire state. We have approximately 55 different ethnic groups, and that's a lot of different kinds of people and a lot of different kinds of cultures. And according to the 2020 New York State Census data, our population is approximately in the range of 326,323. Now, there might be a couple extras since people, continue to have babies. Our commission has 13 slots, and right now we have 2 vacancies. And at the present time, I am conducting interviews for the commission to fill those vacancies. We try to do it as expeditiously as possible because we like a full complement of 13 people. Our commission is a little different. I may be the commissioner, but they have a lot to say. And I make sure that everybody engages and they have a way to express themselves. And we focus on collaboration, consensus. We don't always have to agree. It means we can live with the decision and no fault. Interviews are very important because they give us insight into how people think and whether they'll be really a good fit. Because we're a diverse community, we try to make sure the folks that we select to be on the commission represent and epitomize that diversity. And I'm very pleased to say that when we usually send a slate to the county executive for his approval, his review, he seldom ever says no. And that goes on to the county legislature, and then they end up becoming members of the commission. We have one young lady on there. She's been on since, I think, well, she's been on for over 20 some, no, not 20 some years, 35 years. I'm very fastidious about protocols for meetings because the way you start is the way you finish. And what we pride ourselves in, we have 4 basic indicators for our meetings. Number 1, we post, and we do it throughout the county. Number 2, we have an agenda. We never have a meeting without an agenda, because if the way you start is the way you finish, and if you don't know where you want to go, you'll be all over the place and you'll not get anything accomplished. We also have minutes, and our minutes are very fastidiously taken down and very carefully looked at and read to make sure that we have records of what we have done in the meetings. When I first took over the commission, there weren't any minutes. I had no idea what transpired since the commission started. There are bits and pieces of paper that I looked at, and I was able to kind of piece some things together, but we're very, very, very careful about that. And I've introduced the concept of a commissioner's report. And I generally will report every meeting, and our meetings, by the way, the commission members determine the dates. They usually select the 3rd Monday of every month. And what I like about that is that I try to incorporate them in the decision-making process as much as possible, because people who come to meetings and sit, you don't get anything accomplished like that. And we've moved away from that, and we've moved up and out. And I'm really pleased to mention that we have a community presentation, and you can select your passion, whatever it is. You want to talk about discrimination, race baiting, whatever they present. And then this year we're moving out into the community individually, all 13 of the commission members. When I spoke to Dr. Clark, he asked me, what 3 things do you really want to focus in on? And what does the commission in Rockland County focus on? The overarching thing that we focus on is racism and discrimination. And for a lot of people, when they hear the word race, they start to back up. Our commission doesn't do that. We listen to whatever people have to say. We invite people to come and join us on our meetings. And I must say, we've had 100% attendance for the most part since we've been Zooming. When we go back to our regular meetings after January 15th, which I think the governor had said you can continue until then, we'll see how we do. When I think about racism, I think about personal racism. I've experienced it. When I think about racism, I think about institutional racism. It exists, it's alive and well in many of our institutions, our schools, our places of business where we work. I also think about systemic racism. And a lot of people don't know how to kind of categorically separate them out, but they exist, they're alive and well, and you have to really know what they are. We have disparate racism. And a lot of people will come to me and say, CF, what does that mean? In a nutshell, you have one group of people that's treated differently than somebody else. Our society is not geared that way. And that's why human rights throughout New York State is so critical and so very important. It's in everything we do, every single day. We don't always identify it as disparate or institutional, but it exists. And our commission has been doing everything they can to make people aware. And a lot of it comes through education. Before the pandemic, I usually go every year and I take members of the commission with me, and we go to the Rockland County School Boards Association meeting. I used to be a member of that group back in the day. And it's interesting because as we begin to talk about education, to me, that is the core, and it's the opposite of ignorance. And when you're dealing with racism, it's all about education. You have to educate people because a lot of people are not necessarily invidiously ignorant. They just don't know. So we exist to make sure we enlighten people and make them aware. I also take a group of people and we show up at the superintendent's meeting. And usually we do this around February or January, but with COVID, we have to be a little transparent, but more importantly, a little flexible. So we will get to it this year because I feel it's critical and very, very important. For the school board, they're the governance body. They set policies, and the administrators, the superintendent and their staff, they carry out those policies. And if children are going to learn about racism, what better place for them to learn than in school? The same thing is true with many of our people who serve on boards and who serve on commissions. They don't know the terminology and the vocabulary. My folks, I absolutely make them. They go to workshops called, it was Undoing Racism, and now it's The Root. And it's really interesting. I've been 5 times. I guess they're sick of seeing me, but I learn something every time I go. And the irony of it, every time you learn something, you alter and change your behavior to perceive of new knowledge, but you got to be open. So people that come to serve on our commission, they learn to collaborate and work with each other. And it's almost like another family. And it takes a while to get that, but there has to be some ethos, understanding, and compassion for what we're dealing with. Our goals for this year were very interesting. We have a Hall of Fame in Rockland County that's fabulous. If you ever come down to visit me, I will take you over to the Allison Paris building. And since 1983, our prominent citizens who have shown what they can do in civil rights throughout the community, you will find their pictures prominently posted on the wall. It is something to see. You have a facade and a marble background with color photos, and it's all people from different walks of life and diversity about their contributions to civil rights. And we make a big deal about it because it is a big deal. This past September 23rd, we had an unveiling for Thurgood Marshall Monument. We've been working on that for the past 2.5 years. I hired a sculptor from Hawaii, and I have to tell you, Maria, I will share with you. I'll send you the link, and Audie, if you want the link, and Ken, so you can see what we did in the community. I have never seen people so proud. He came to our county in 1943 and helped them understand with the Hillburn School. that you can't have a segregated school system. It just doesn't work. So we're trying to connect the dots in Rockland. We have other monuments which have, made contributions, and other people to not only African Americans, but Latinos and Muslims. We try to include everybody because that's what it's about. We're beginning to restructure our commission, and I'm really excited about it because what we had initially was not as effective as what we are moving towards to make sure we include everybody in the county. We have 2 vacancies for the Human Rights Commission specialists, and we're interviewing now. If you know of anybody that's interested, by all means, tell them to get in touch with me. And we will also fill the 2 vacancies we have on the commission. In 2022, I'm in the process now of developing an African American historical brochure, and if God spares me, I'll be able to do one for the Muslims, the Latinos, and everybody. Because this is very important for people to know how important their culture is. If you have more of an understanding of it, then it's easier when we begin to explain why you can't be a racist. The Hall of Fame, we've been conducting by Zoom. I will let you know when we're having it in April. It's beautiful. It's something that you don't want to miss. It's very carefully orchestrated, but the people who are inducted into the Hall of Fame, I've never seen anything like it in my life. There's tears of joy and people that just get in it, and people who would recognize them. It's a powerful, beautiful thing. So I want to share that with you when we do it in April. Let everybody know about it. This will be done by Zoom. And I had to kind of juggle things around because of COVID, but it's okay. We are able to work it out. And then in, I believe, October, we have a luncheon to commemorate for 2022. So we'll do 2021 in April and 2022 in October, and you're all invited. It'll cost a little something, but don't worry about it. I'll make sure that you get in. The implementation of the restructuring for our teams will include myself, the commissioner, an administrative assistant, and 2 human rights specialists. And our approach will be that of a team, to build a team to deal with the cases of discrimination and housing and employment. And the last thing I want to point out to you is that if you keep doing things the same way, you get the same results. Our trajectory and our paradigm shift is to create the best possible Human Rights Commission that we can, with the staff that we have that's effective to meet the needs of people in 5 townships in Rockland County. And I might add, Ken, whatever you all did in Tompkins to get more diversity, I'd like to talk to you about it, because everything that you do is predicated on relationships. And since I've been there, we have developed some really good networks, relationships. We work with Teja Sanchella in Westchester. He's outstanding to work with. He's smart. He's a lawyer. We have assets that we can capitalize on in the Mid-Hudson area and all the way up to where you are, Ken. And I think at some point when we lift COVID, or COVID leaves us alone enough so we can function, we need to have a conference in the Mid-Hudson area. And we need to sit down, and because we are all different, but we're alike in the sense that we want to root out racism within our respective areas that we serve. Because I think we owe it to the people, and we owe it to the residents. I will stop at that point. If anybody would like to contact me, I can give you my contact information later on. And I want to just say the last thing is that I don't know everything, but I'm a hell of a reflective listener. And if I can listen to what you're saying, and when people come to me, all they want somebody to do is just listen. You may not be able to fix everything, but sometimes you can put them in touch with somebody else that can help them fix it. So, we don't have supermen and superwomen, but some of the problems we have in our society now that breed this racism, it's spawned from ignorance. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Constance. And we will now transition to Enaudi.
Thank you so much, Ken, the Office for Human Rights in Tompkins County. Thank you, Constance, for those wonderful words. And
My
it
pleasure.
really is a privilege to be a part of this conversation with you, with Commissioner Imperial. It is an honor to be here. My name is Einaudi Esposito. I am the Executive Director for the Orange County Human Rights Commission. And our mission is very similar to my fellow colleagues here. It's to bring the community together. It's to make sure that we are highlighting and raising the issues of human rights, the issues that are impacting our most vulnerable communities, impacting the folks who aren't able to have a seat at the tables where we are, to make sure that their voices and their plights are not forgotten. We do this through education. We do this through awareness events. We do this through in attending meetings, answering phone calls, answering constituent questions. My Human Rights Commission, similar to Constance's, is a little different, right? Throughout the entire state, all the commissions look a little different. We actually do not, I am a department of one. We do not do investigations, so we don't have specialists on board, but I do get to work with an amazing group of individuals, 12 individuals who serve as human rights commissioners for Orange County. And alongside the county executive's office, who I report to, they guide the work of human rights in our county and make sure that we are bringing to light the issues that need to be addressed, and that we support our constituents, that we support the folks of Orange County and the larger community. Throughout the year, I host virtual events because now everything we do is virtual, right? We're starting to do a little more hybrid, but we host virtual events that focus on all sorts of conversations, whether it's anti-Semitism, whether it's anti-Asian hate, because we saw a huge increase in that, not only in our community, but nationwide because of the pandemic and the rhetoric that was being thrown out and the language around just hateful things around the Asian community. We have conversations about things like issues impacting the LGBT community, issues impacting the trans community. And 100% wholeheartedly agree with Constance. The bulk of our work is around racism. The bulk of our work is around addressing issues like systemic racism, interpersonal racism, and internalized racism is something that, as a woman of color, as a Latina, as an immigrant, I get to speak a lot on, because imposter syndrome is real and internalized racism is so real, not only in our culture, but in our communities. So I spend the bulk of my time educating and planting seeds and just talking to folks about things that they are very often uncomfortable with talking about. I talk a lot about things like white privilege. I talk a lot about things like systemic racism, the newest one, critical race theory, right? The big CRT word that everybody's so afraid of. But I like to, debunk those myths and say, no, this is what's really going on. This is really the incredible work that educators are doing, and this is what they're not doing. So my job is quite entertaining often, but it comes with lots of challenges. Ken, you gave us a really hard task of talk about the 3 main issues of human rights in under 10 minutes. That's impossible. So in under 6 minutes, I'm going to talk about 2 issues. How's that? Great. Because I do want to talk about something that, we're all experiencing. We're still in the middle of a pandemic. Of course, we are all experiencing this pandemic, but we have to be realistic and honest about the fact that we are not all experiencing it the same way. That's Communities true. Of color, specifically the Black community, Black folks are dying at higher rates from COVID, right? We saw for a very long time Latinos were getting infected with much higher rates. And we know that the disproportionate numbers are not just in our county, not just in our state, but nationwide, right? And we have a really clear understanding that that is because quite a large amount, right? It's something like 52% of the folks who are right there, essential workers who, had to work through the entire pandemic, who could not social distance, who could not work virtually from home, were Black and brown folks. Right. So they were experiencing it at really higher rates. around that conversation, and I have a couple of slides that help me guide the conversation. I want to talk about the importance of understanding the wage gap in America, and in understanding when we talk about systemic racism, there are so many levels of conversation around systemic racism that we can have. But one of the things that we often don't get an opportunity to discuss, which is why I'm bringing it to the table, because I know that my colleagues are going to talk about similar issues, is the fact that because of centuries of inequality and racism, right? Economists say that the difference, the gap between what Black homeowners or Black Americans have versus white Americans have is too significant to be impacted by individual actions, achievements, or personal choices. Because quite often the conversation is around, well, they're on welfare, but yet they have an iPhone, or look at them wearing $200 sneakers, or if they just pick themselves up by their bootstraps like I did, or they're too lazy to want to work. When really, the amount of evidence of decades of reports, this is not new. This isn't something that just or was invented in the 90s, right? We are talking about the Federal Reserve System, the U.S. Department of Labor, the Department of Commerce, right? A whole bunch of academic and professional studies that have been done that just show that the wealth gap is really the product of inequality and racism. And that the amount of it is so large that there are not enough Beyoncés and Jay-Z's in this country to shorten that gap. And to give you some numbers, for example, there was a study that was done by the Cook Center on Social Equity. And here is a perfect example. So post-college, the U.S. median household net worth by Reston Education post-college for a white household is $455,000 versus the same level of education for a Black household, that's $141,000. The biggest number I want to point out here is that a Black household with college education still makes less than a white household with less than high school education. So you've got Black folks who go to college and are still making less than their white counterparts with less than high school. And we need to discuss these issues. We need to be able to highlight the fact that this is a problem. This has been a problem for centuries, and we cannot continue to expect our community, to expect our young people to just get up and go to college and things will be great. Because when we talk about systemic racism, it's a much larger conversation. The other real quick that I think is very related to this conversation issue that I want to bring to light is the gender gap, right? I mean, we cannot talk about the gender pay gap. We cannot talk about human rights issues without talking about gender. And we have seen these graphics. We have seen these numbers quite many times, especially since 2016, 17, when a lot of these studies started to come out. But the fact that for every dollar, right, that a white person makes, specifically a white male makes, women are coming in really, really short. And when you break that into by race, when you break that into categories, we see the disparities grow even more, right? So for every dollar that a white male made, and this particular one was in 2018, an Asian woman made 85 cents, right? Women overall, 80 cents. White women, 77 cents. Black women, 61 cents to the dollar. Native American women, 58. And coming in at the bottom of it all, Latina women, 53 cents. For a Latina woman to make the same amount of money, the same dollar, right, as a white man, they have to work an extra 11 months to be able to be equally paid. And I'm gonna just to finish up because my time is almost up, but let's bring this to COVID. And I think a lot of us have been, we've been hearing a lot about the concerns of women dropping out of the workforce at really high rates in our country because of the pandemic and because of all the impact of everything from childcare. I mean, I am a mother of 3. And I got to tell you, every time one of my children has a cough now, I am out of work for 3 days
Mhm.
because the school, right? The policy now is, well, there's a cough. Oh, wait a minute. There's a scratchy throat there. Not only do you have to get them tested for COVID, but you have to get them tested for strep, and they cannot come back to school unless they have a note, right? And that takes 3 days because the tests have to be sent out. There's a rapid test that comes back quickly, but if you're doing the cold, don't get me started on that. My kids get strep throat like, we get allergies around here. I am very privileged to be able to do some work from home, but what about the thousands of women who cannot do that, who do not have access to childcare? We've had issues around access to childcare for many years, but now add the demands of COVID. And let's not even start talking about when a child needs to isolate, or when a child was exposed because the classmate brought it in, or because, someone was symptomatic and was positive, and now they have to quarantine at home for a week. Who stays with that child at home? Right? How many of our employers are able to say, oh, of course, work from home, or are able to offer the flexibility? Remember how we started this conversation with the Black and Brown community being impacted because of the type of work. You can't do the farming from a computer, right? You can't stock the grocery store from a computer. You can't have restaurant workers work virtual. That just doesn't exist. So we're losing women at double the amount of time, at double the percentage, or twice the rate that we are losing men in the workforce. And if you can see the graphic in front of us, this was in 2020. The numbers have continued to increase in 2021, but not only do you see the disparities between white, Black, Latino, but you can see how clear it is also amongst gender. So I wanted to bring those 2 points to the table for conversation, but it really is a wonderful honor to be a part of this. So thank you for giving me some time.
Thank you so much, Inadi. And now we will hear from Maria.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Dr. Clark, for inviting me. And it's an honor to be on this panel with CF and also Equality. I'm Maria Imperial, and I've been nominated by Governor Hochul to be the commissioner of the New York State Division of Human Rights. I'm so excited at the prospect of serving as part of her historic administration. This role is the culmination of my life's work, which has been dedicated to advocating for gender and racial equality and equity. That is what I've been doing for the past 14 years at the YWCA of White Plains and Central Westchester, and what I will continue to do for the rest of my career. In 1945, New York became the first state in the nation to enact a statewide anti-discrimination law. DHR was created to enforce that law. I'm proud to be part of that legacy of leadership and to be in a position to move that work forward. I'm so glad that Dr. Clark read the quote from Eleanor Roosevelt that she said on the 10th anniversary of the Declaration of International Human Rights, which says that universal human rights actually begin in neighborhoods close to home. And I tell everyone that the most important part of who I am is that I grew up in the Bronx, in a community that fostered caring about each other and respecting our differences. Just the kind of place that Eleanor Roosevelt was talking about, where human rights begin. My zip code was 10458, which is the same zip code of the headquarters of the State Division of Human Rights in the Bronx, where I am now working. I'm the original West Side Story. My mother told me that I was named after the song from the movie. My father was Italian and my mother was Nicaraguan. They met on the A train. She lived in Washington Heights and he lived in the Bronx, and it was love at first sight. They married and had 4 daughters. When people would express sorrow at my father's predicament, always being around women, he would say that he was the luckiest man in the world. And I grew up feeling that I was the luckiest daughter in the world. When I was in high school, we moved to White Plains. My mother was so proud to finally move into a house. As we had a large extended family, we had many relatives and visitors stopping by. Within a week of moving to White Plains, we were visited by a housing inspector who told us that some of the neighbors had complained that we were running a hotel and violating the zoning code. My mother was a bilingual school teacher in New York City. She noticed that the children in her school who spoke Spanish were often placed in special education despite being bright and having the potential to succeed in the mainstream. To address this situation, she decided to become a special education evaluator. Education was very important to her, and she knew that it was important for children to have access to educational resources in order to advance. After graduating from law school and working as an attorney in private practice, I became the general counsel for Safe Horizon, the largest victim services organization in the United States. At Safe Horizon, I started a domestic violence law project because countless domestic violence victims would call the agency in search of an attorney, and I was the only attorney available. Combating domestic violence became my passion. My career became intentionally focused on trying to achieve justice and advancing human rights for women. For tonight's presentation, Dr. Clark asked us to think of 3 areas where we would like to see inequality reduced and human rights advanced. The 3 areas that I have chosen based on my background and past experience are fair housing, education, and domestic violence. I said that one of the most important parts of who I am is where I grew up. It's said that your zip code is more predictive of your success in life than your genetic code. My zip code impacted almost everything. My chances of graduating from high school or college, whether or not I had interaction with the criminal justice system, could own a home, have a good credit score, and even how long I might live. A recent study from the National Fair Housing Alliance found that people of color often live in neighborhoods where there isn't easy access to healthy food or grocery stores, where there are fewer healthcare facilities, fewer banks and financial institutions, and lower quality schools. In the Bronx, where I grew up and where our headquarters are located, 25% of households fall below the federal poverty line in the Bronx, nearly double the national rate. Less than 20% of families own their own homes, and 42% of households have limited access to credit. Of course, these are problems that exist across the state. Housing discrimination, both historical and current, is the reason for the continued inequity. Enforcement is one tool we use to reduce inequality. The New York State human rights law prohibits discrimination by those who rent or sell housing, financial institutions, and even real estate professionals. Just 1 second. Sorry. Sorry, I lost my place. Individuals can file complaints with DHR when they face discrimination, or the agency can launch an investigation when it discovers systemic issues. For example, we recently settled an agency-initiated complaint against real estate websites that were alleged to have made it more difficult for recipients of Section 8 housing assistance to find available housing. The other tool is education. We work with community organizations, first-time home buyer counselors, foreclosure prevention counselors, and other housing entities to ensure they understand the law and how to identify discrimination when they come across it. We also engage the real estate industry and real estate agents to ensure they know that steering clients to neighborhoods based on factors such as race or national origin is against the law. But there's so much more work to do. I mentioned how committed to education my mother was. Every child deserves an education and the right to attend school. Discrimination against children, especially girls of color and other marginalized students, has led to disproportionately exclude students from attending school. This discrimination results from harsh discipline, such as suspension, expulsion, and even arrests based on race or disability. In New York State, starting in preschool, students with disabilities and students of color are generally suspended and expelled at higher rates. According to the National Women's Law Center, nationally, compared to white girls, Black girls are 4 times more likely to receive at least 1 out-of-school suspension, 4 times more likely to be expelled, and 4 times more likely to be arrested at school. The ACLU estimates that students annually miss 11 million school days collectively, or 63,000 school years due to exclusionary disciplinary action. Among those lost school days, Black students were 5 times more likely to lose valuable school time than white students. Fortunately, the human rights law was recently amended to prohibit discrimination at public schools and universities. We are starting to see cases come in with these sorts of allegations and have begun investigating them. We're also working with stakeholders in this field to ensure that parents and children know that they have rights under the law and how to enforce those rights. Domestic violence was the third area that I chose. Domestic violence is a violation of human rights. While it's often seen as a private matter, the human rights framework provides a tool to reframe it as a systemic problem that the state has an obligation to address. The human rights law now requires employers to reasonably accommodate the need for time off because of domestic violence, so long as it is not an undue hardship for the employer. Time off can be for the accommodation of the need for medical attention, obtaining services from a domestic violence shelter, obtaining counseling, safety planning, or obtaining legal services. The law also protects victims of domestic violence from employment discrimination in hiring for jobs, promotions, or other conditions of employment. As long as people face discrimination in housing, are valued less, not schooled, subjected to violence in and out of their homes, the potential to promote peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all cannot be realized. Healthy lives and equitable outcomes are goals we seek for all, regardless of where people live. At the division, we are part of a movement to build a better world. Thank you so much for the honor of letting me present to you tonight.
Thank you so much, Maria, and thanks to each of our panelists for excellent presentations and perspectives on the most salient and important human rights issues of our time. We welcome now those in the audience to submit their questions to us through the chat function on YouTube. And while we await those questions, I'd like to start off with one. One of the things I was struck by, Constance, in your presentation was you talked about how important listening is. And I'm reminded of something, this is sort of a paraphrase of a quote from Dr. King that he said, in which he said something to this effect, that we hate each other because we do not know each other, do not know each other because we do not talk to one another. And talking to each other requires listening. How, I'd welcome each of you to ponder how to address this particular issue, especially in light of so much noise that comes in the form of misinformation in our culture through social media platforms, the ways in which this pandemic has been politicized, and in which there's just this reluctance to, and distrust, really, that exists within the larger culture, that breeds suspicion, it breeds racism, and other types of phobias. And so how to address that issue, or what suggestions might one make?
One of the things that I try to do is build that trust in the relationship, because if people feel comfortable, they're likely to listen carefully if they respect you and you respect them. What I have found is that our fabric and our values, our mores and folkways, have somewhat dissipated because people do not listen, and the perception is you don't care anything about me. When you're dealing with human rights and issues, most of the time people come to you, they are upset. Every single thing that we do is controlled by our emotions. And before you can get anybody to talk to you, you have to kind of calm them down.
Mhm.
I always start with a friendly conversation. And if it's something that I've had a relationship with or something that I know about, and I've had many, I try to identify and empathize with what it is they're dealing with.
Mhm.
Most important thing, especially when you're dealing with cases of racism and discrimination in housing and employment, I always indicate that it's a fireside chat. And I have a make-believe fireplace in my office. I really don't. I do that with interviews, and I do that when I'm really trying to work with people. But the only way, and Ken, the noise is almost overwhelming. I don't watch the TV so much anymore because it's so negative. And as I said, everything we do is controlled by our emotions. So I try to take the high road. After you open it up a little bit and get people to kind of talk, I always get a bottle of water.
Hmm.
Give them a bottle of water. Water does something magnificent.
Hmm.
Makes people feel comfortable. I don't know what's in what, H2O, right? 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen. But it's everything that we do is predicated on trust.
Mhm.
And I always have a phrase that I use, I hear you. When I say that, there's something magic about the fact they say, oh my God, she's listening to me. Nobody ever
Mhm.
listens to me. And that's the problem. A lot of
Mhm.
times I can't fix something that people bring to me, but I do listen. Now,
Mhm.
I have some ground rules. Sometimes people get emotionally distraught and they use this profane language, and I can't have that because that's not good. I get it, and I understand when somebody's affronted you. And a lot of times when they come to you, it's not necessarily racism or discrimination, it's just plain old misunderstanding and lack of communication.
Mhm.
You have to develop a good filter. And that filter, it's almost like you have to separate the chaff from the wheat.
Mhm.
And that's a skill set of being kind of seasoned to listen and then filter what they're saying and to see if I can kind of connect to help them.
Mhm.
I don't know if that helps, but that's what I do.
I think it's very helpful. Maria and Nowdy.
Yeah, I actually have what I call 3 pillars of conversation or guidelines that I like to suggest whenever I host presentations. And I say, I find this to be useful when anyone is ever having these really difficult conversations around these issues. They are, I ask folks for respect, openness, and discomfort. And when I say respect, I'm not talking about the don't speak over me, the don't, kind of like the stuff that we should already have. It's more along the lines of the ability to respect one's experience, not the opinion, but their experience. Because when we're sharing something from an experience of having membership in a group, membership in a community, that's different than the opinion that I may have around something. And I think that's really important for folks to understand because our experiences are shaped by our identities.
That's true.
And the intersectionality of our identities. I've shared that I'm a Latina, that I'm an immigrant, right? That I'm a woman, I'm a cisgender woman, I'm a heterosexual woman. So my experiences have all been shaped by those identities. And when I am sharing something, I ask folks to remember that those are my experiences and to be respectful of that. And that requires openness, right? That requires folks to be open to the idea that, oh, my experience is different than yours. And maybe that's why we disagree. Maybe that's why I don't get it. Maybe that's why I don't understand it. And maybe that's why I'm uncomfortable. And discomfort is okay. It is okay to be made uncomfortable by someone because you don't understand the experience they're coming out of. It's what you do and how you respond to that discomfort. So when I ask folks to sit in their discomfort, it's just to sit back and hear yourself, right? Ask yourself, what do I feel in that moment? Where did I feel it, right? And what about what that person, that individual just said made me so uncomfortable that I physically felt it? And to do some critical thinking around what do I need to work on? What are my biases, right? What am I internalizing here when really this individual is just sharing their experience with me? But being able to do that in a safe space, I talk a lot about the importance of creating spaces to have these conversations, because when we say things like diversity, inclusion, I do a lot of this work in the workplace. We cannot do any of those without building relationships, because building relationship is really at the foundation of diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. And communication is really at the bottom of all that. So,
yeah. Discomfort is also often the place where learning happens.
Yeah. Yes.
Very true.
It's the growing edge, they call it, right, Constance, and undoing racism?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
The other thing I wanted to point out, if I may, we tend to dislike that which we do not understand.
Mhm.
That's human nature, but it's
Yes.
powerful. That's why the listening piece is so critical, because if you listen, you learn. If
Mm-hmm.
you don't listen, you shut down.
Mhm.
Yes. Maria, any comments?
Because I agree. And part of the reason why I'm so excited or looking forward to being the commissioner is that I think it's important that we recognize, and that's the beauty of tomorrow, the International Day of Human Rights, that we recognize each other's humanity. And if we realize that each person has dignity just by the very
Exactly.
fact of being a person. And so I think education is key, but really, if you look at issues as issues of humanity, then I guess I feel like there's hope, because people's cruelty to other people. But if you realize that we're all humans, we're all in this together, that I think that could be a positive approach. I know I had mentioned that I guess I'm not the typical commissioner, in that I'm not a civil rights enforcement, because and I think there's a place for enforcement, but I'm very interested in thinking about how can we prevent this. It's much broader than just enforcing people's rights. I think it's very important to enforce people's rights, but why don't we try to build a community where we all relate to each other on a human level? So again, that's what, in terms of a vision, that's what part of the vision of I see as the State Division of Human Rights, not just enforcement, but promoting peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all.
Thank you. Thank you. We have a question that's come to us, and the question is, how do our offices work together?
So I can jump in many different ways. So a lot of our offices, so for example, in my case, I work really closely with the Dutchess County, the Ulster County, the Rockland County, the Westchester County, because we're all kind of in the Sullivan County. We're all kind of really close geographically. We host events together where we do similar to this, right? Ken, you've invited me a couple of times. You're all the way. I don't even know where Tompkins County is. I don't even know where you are, right? But we're
Near Syracuse.
Oh, that's really far.
An hour away.
Okay, thank the goodness for virtual world. But this is how we do it, right? We get on the phone and we ask each other the hard questions. We email each other saying, I have no idea, what this is, or what did you do for this? When the executive order EO 203 came out around having to work together around police issues, commissions were talking to each other, like, what's your commission doing? How are you working with your county executives and the local police departments? And the state is a huge resource for us. The state, brings us together on a monthly basis or a bi-monthly basis in the convening meetings, and we get to hear what we're doing so that we can support our constituents together and in the best way possible.
Okay.
We also, if I may, have developed a partnership program, or a buddy system, if you will, for some of the newer executive directors that have, that have been hired, and some of the newer commissioners. There is no set protocol and there's no training for a human rights commissioner or an executive director. It just isn't. Most of people have skills that they can walk right over into that position. But to be effective, you must have a sense of humanity and compassion. You have to have that. And when you're dealing with people that LGBTQ plus, you have to try to understand what they're dealing with. So in my opinion, it's almost like a rubber band. You have to be able to stretch yourself quite a bit. And you have to bring a modest sense of objectivity to everything that you do. And keep in mind, whatever we do to make the connection, it's all about relationships. We learn from each other. And as Anabi points out, we share with each other. When we have our monthly meetings with a smaller group of executive directors and commissioners, it's been extremely helpful because you don't feel that you're alone, but yet and still you have somebody else that might have a similar problem. And even after the meetings are over that we have in Zoom, I can call Ken or Ken can call me. Some folks came down to Utica to spend some time with me. We had Adrian Jensen from Sullivan County who came down several times. In fact, she's coming to visit as soon as she comes back from a family emergency. That's how we have to be able to deal with our situations, because nothing is ever going to be perfect. It's not a perfect science. It's not finite. And some of it's trial and error and some of it's fortuitous. Things happen by chance, but I will say this, in all due respect, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. I don't plan to fail because I'm always thinking, how can I do this better? How can I be more effective? So you have to be very open-minded. And as Ken points out all the time, you have to listen. You really do. And that was the most difficult thing for me, because having been a school administrator all my career and all my life, I listen to kids, but adults are just big kids.
Maria?
What, I know we actually have MOUs with some specific divisions across the state where we provide resources and also share investigation or investigation of complaints. But I definitely think that there's room for more collaboration. And that's one of the things that I look forward to. I'm looking so forward to participating in this buddy system or just having more statewide or even regional meetings, because I think we all can learn from each other. And that I always say, strong alone, fearless together. So if we work together, I think we could have a much greater impact.
Sure.
I agree with you. We're better together.
Agreed. Totally agreed. In my own experience, I mean, 3 years ago this time, I traveled to Dutchess County for a major human rights event. In fact, that's where I met Inaudi and Jody Miller, who organized that event in 2018. It's hard to believe that's been 3 years ago. And also it provided me an opportunity to learn about an office in another region completely. From us, I visited with Constance in June of 2019 and visited her office. And this was part of a larger sort of fact-finding mission I was on in terms of understanding how other commissions operated. And as part of a larger data gathering that we were doing at that time. And so that has been greatly important to me. And I look forward, once things lift, to visit other places, and would certainly welcome colleagues to visit us as well. I've got one or two more questions before we end our meeting. But one of the things that was discussed in the presentations that each of you gave was about the way in which, we've had these sort of these really sort of racist or I would say the sloganeering, which has taken a concept such as critical race theory, for example, taking it completely out of perspective and out of its context, and by people who I would wager know little about what critical race theory actually is as a concept taught in law schools, to really do an evaluation of some of the shortcomings of what the civil rights movement did not address in terms of certain aspects of the laws that were passed, whether it was the Voting Rights Act, Civil Rights Act, Fair Housing Act, and taking a critical analysis of the work that needs to be done. But that has been used as a cudgel by those who stand against diversity and inclusion. And one of the things too that has been also raised more recently has been this issue that it's sort of related to that, this whole notion of wokeness, and how wokeness has been perceived as an enemy to addressing racism. Most recently, John McWhorter has written this book about this, which I think betrays really a fundamental misunderstanding of the term, but also that it really does not deal sufficiently with or take into consideration the institutional realities of racism. Could you expand a little bit more on that in terms of what we see on the national as well as your own local landscapes?
Well, we are just getting into an explanation of it, and I have it on the agenda for January to have a complete discussion of it. What I have found, Ken, over time, people don't understand and they don't have a vocabulary about what you're talking about. So what I try to do is set a common ground. What do we mean by critical race theory? What does it really mean? And I find that not from an etymological derivation point of view, you have to use definitions that make some sense.
Mm-hmm.
And they have to have some credibility, so that the mechanics of the discussion of it is, in my opinion, on a national level, a lot of politics have gotten involved. And what that has done is minimize what critical race theory is really trying to address. You cannot undo civil rights. It's part of our history and part of our culture. And you can bring all kinds of processes to bear. It's not going to undo what's been done. That's like people trying to say, well, we're going to get rid of slavery, all right? And we're going to knock down all the monuments to all these people that we don't like because we just feel that it's just not the right thing to do. You must have a clear, lucid understanding and vocabulary of what the words mean, and then have the tough discussions. And we had a discussion one night about 2 months ago, and that's why human rights commissions exist. You have to continue to have those kinds of discussions. They make people uncomfortable. The more uncomfortable the discussion, the more you're going to accomplish. The connection that we have now in Rockland is, how do we get that out into the community? I have a rabbi on the commission. I love him. He's got 1 foot in the secular world. He's got 1 foot in his world. He's ultra-Orthodox. I can't tell you, he just got another job, I believe, with a very prominent organization. But that's where the diversity comes in. And sometimes we tend to dislike that which we don't understand because I don't know anything about it. I don't like it. So when you talk about critical race theory or institutional racism, you have to be clear about what you're talking about, what the definition is, what it means. I gave all my folks a vocabulary. I wasn't trying, that's a teacher in me, I can't help that. I do feel it's important that you have common ground so that you begin to talk about it. That's why, that's one of the topics that I will be speaking about when I go before the school board and also before the school superintendents. And it's just so very important. And I think it's a process of not only commission members, but executive directors and commissioners. We have to educate ourselves about what's really going on. A lot of us don't really know. And if you don't know, you should find out, ask somebody, or get with a group of people called ADL, whatever you have to do. You have to become knowledgeable because technically you're a leader. You're supposed to be able to talk to people about what do these things mean. And if you don't know what they mean, it's predictable that you're not going to be able to do anything with it.
Yep. Other comments?
Yeah, I just want to add to that, that it's actually I agree with Constance. It's a conversation that we've been having in our county actually for a couple of months, because there was recently a local assemblyman who wanted to introduce a bill to ban CRT from schools, from elementary and middle schools. And there's a lot of misunderstanding and misconceptions and a lot of fear mongering going on from folks who just really don't understand CRT. Sometimes when I'm asked about it, I say, I don't know, I didn't go to law school, because folks don't understand that that is not something that we are being taught in schools at all, unless you are getting a law degree, right? Or unless you're reading books and specifically, right? We are not critical race theorists. We do, however, understand a lot of what the theory is explaining with the beginning of how race is a social construct, right? And how systemic racism is real, right? That's really the crux of it. It's really understanding that our system was built around the backs of Black people, and it was built specifically to keep white folks in power. And understanding that is the first step in us ever being able to tackle racism systemically. So I agree that part of or if not the biggest issue, is the lack of understanding and the lack of awareness, the lack of education. Our commission has also actually in a couple of meetings expressed, we don't know what we're talking about. Like, we kind of know, but again, unless, right? So it's saying, hey, can you give us, I came up with this 10-minute presentation, and I'm like, I would never do this publicly because I cannot present on CRT. I will put some thoughts together for my commission so that we can use at least the same language and the same vocabulary so that we're on the same page. But the biggest caveat is no, I am not a theorist, because again, it's not something, I've said I'm doing racism 6 times and I'm still also learning, like Constance said, every single time.
See how open you are.
Yes.
Your mind is open to deal with issues like that.
Yes.
That's why I said initially, we don't know everything.
We can't
know everything.
Okay? You know what I do know, Constant? I know a lot of people.
I know what I don't know.
And I know what I don't know. I have a lot of people on my speed dial who I can say to, do you know who has this answer? Because I sure don't.
But see, that's the value of us coming together, maybe this spring.
Right.
And a conference in the Mid-Hudson, so we can get at topics like that and we can get points of view. And then when we come away, we always try to fix everything. You can't always fix everything if you don't understand what it is to fix.
Right.
Right.
I agree. I think that this sounds like it would be really a good topic for all of us to to have a conference on, or to educate ourselves on. But
you've got one coming up in February.
Oh, good.
Yes, I'll make sure to invite you all.
Oh, thank you.
It's going to be.
But I guess it also
going to be virtual, first week of February.
It also reminds me how important, because I have to tell you, at times I get very frightened by the things that people want to do, banning books, or again, based on ignorance. But you see how important it is for people to run for office in terms of school boards. People don't realize, now I think more people realize, like, it's very important that, that there be more diversity and inclusion on school boards, because school boards are making important decisions.
And I think too, education about these issues and hearing from experts.
That's true.
Is important in terms of, I think it's part of this larger sort of struggle around narrative. It was once said that while the North won the hot war, the Civil War, the South won the narrative war. and I think, and what we have going on is this ongoing struggle over narrative. And in developing a narrative, that also enables us to recognize that, in truth, a lot of this talk about banning CRT is really about, a response to projects such as the 1619 Project, Nicole Hannah Jones.
Absolutely.
And the truth that is uncomfortable.
It is.
Segments of the American population to this day who do not want to deal with the realities of systemic and institutional racism that are rooted and grounded in slavery and that are endemic to the American experience. And so that is part of what I think needs to happen in terms of really providing a counter narrative that is consistent with the work of human rights and the 30 articles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I think that may be a good note on which we can end with a challenge for us in what remains of this year, but also for the upcoming new year. And so I want to thank each of you for joining us this evening and for providing some wonderful perspectives on your work as well as your priorities in relation to human rights work in your respective venues, but also with implications for that work everywhere. And so thank you all for joining us this evening, and want to thank our audience for joining us as well. And so we'll just ask you to hang on for a few minutes, panelists, as we close up and end our live streaming session.